Vladimir Putin's cities are collapsing. Belgorod region governor Vyacheslav Gladkov ordered the evacuation of the region.
If you have school-age children over the age of 11, we are ready to send them to other regions we are already familiar with, such as the Republic of Crimea.
This was an admission of failure, and it triggered a wave of panic. People are now only thinking about fleeing to safer areas. When we examine the technical anatomy of the incident, what we see is not randomly fired ammunition, but a systematic execution planned with surgical precision. Ukraine carried out a sophisticated attack with 20 ballistic missiles, 10 cruise missiles, and hundreds of kamikaze drones. The skies over Belgorod and Bryansk turned into hell with Neptune and Flamingo missiles. The consequences of the attack were devastating for the Russians. 600,000 people were immediately left without electricity and heat.
In short, I finally decided to stop saving money on myself and treated my beloved self. And I bought myself this kind of thing. Powerful heater.
These ironic words are proof of how the cold turned into a nightmare for Russian citizens. 200,000 people were completely deprived of water, their main source of life.
I'm showing how I survive in Belgorod. Due to the latest missile threats, I have had no hot water or heating for 3 days, and sometimes no electricity.
In this country, experiencing energy and fuel shortages, even being able to use a car was a luxury. Those who couldn't charge their electric vehicles were stranded on the roads.
That's it. And the heater just stupidly blows cold air, and there's no point in turning it on at all. There.
This viral outcry on social media summed up how darkness and cold had become routine for Russians. It all started with partisan networks across the border. By tracking the gaps in Russia's air defense systems, the shift changes at thermal power plants, and the coordinates of critical transformer stations, Atesh and local resistance fighters gave Kiev the green light. At the top of the target list was the beating heart of Belgorod, the Luch thermal power plant. By February 8th, when Russian air defense radars detected multiple high-speed targets over Bryansk and Belgorod, it was already too late. The Ukrainian army pierced the defense shield using a deadly combination of modernized Neptune missiles and HIMARS systems. The first missiles targeted the turbine halls of the Luch power plant. Turbines are the brain of a power plant. When you hit them, you don't just shut down the system, you destroy it from within. Local sources and leaked footage confirmed that the plant's main distribution network was hit by multiple missiles and that the attack was repeated 3 times a day, preventing repair crews from intervening. This is a ruthless but effective tactic known in military literature as double tap, aimed at rendering the target completely inoperable. The repercussions of this tactic were catastrophic for the Russian people. As power and water outages paralyzed life, the city froze. The brutal Russian winter, with temperatures dropping to -30 degrees, had become Ukraine's greatest ally. When a thermal power plant goes offline, it's not just the lights that go out. The pressure in the network drops, the circulation pumps stop, and the water in the pipes becomes stagnant. When the laws of physics kick in, that stagnant water freezes and expands. This is exactly what is happening in 1,900 apartment blocks in Belgorod right now. The plumbing system is bursting from the inside. The images circulating on social media are reminiscent of apocalyptic films. Water gushing from burst pipes freezes in apartment hallways, forming ice waterfalls. People are trapped in medieval conditions in their own homes, in the middle of the modern world. The heating systems have collapsed, radiators have turned into ice blocks. Ukraine didn't just hit a building, it pulled the plug on the city's entire life support system. When combined with the Neptune attacks on the energy system in the Bryansk region, the scale of this operation becomes clearer. These transformer stations supplied not only civilians but also industrial facilities and military maintenance workshops in the region. Now they are all plunged into darkness. Russia's technological infrastructure was helplessly crushed by the cold and darkness. The tactical success of this operation also destroyed Russia's air defense doctrine. These sacred lands, allegedly protected by S-400s and Panzers, were turned into sieves by Ukrainian missiles. The failure to protect a strategic asset like the Luch power plant proves that Moscow's air defense systems are either inadequate or have been pulled back to the front line, leaving the rear defenseless. Both scenarios are a nightmare for the Kremlin, because this breach in the defense wall shows that Ukraine's long-range capabilities now extend to Russia's internal organs. And worst of all, this is just the beginning. Russia's energy infrastructure is buckling under the biggest stress test in its history. To read this attack solely through the lens of frozen civilians is to underestimate the strategic genius of Ukraine's general staff. The real purpose of striking the Luch power plant and Bryansk transformers was to cut off the oxygen supply to the Russian war machine. To understand Russian military logistics, you need to know one simple fact. The Russian army is an organism dependent on railways. Tanks, ammunition boxes, personnel and fuel all move on those endless tracks. And 90% of this massive railway network in Russia runs on electric locomotives. No electricity means no trains. No trains means no ammunition to the front lines. The equation is that simple, and the consequences are devastating for the Kremlin. Located just 50 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, Belgorod and Bryansk are not ordinary cities, but massive logistics hubs, where supply lines from Moscow branch out to the southern front. The destruction of transformer stations in these regions has dried up the Steel River that feeds the Kharkiv and Donbass fronts. When the Luch power plant went offline, it wasn't just the lights in homes that went out. Power stations feeding railway signaling systems, switches and catenary lines also halted. At this very moment, the chaos deepens. Taking advantage of the darkness created by the power outage, the resistance legions made their final move to completely halt the shipment of military supplies in Bryansk. According to confirmed reports from the field, 2 critical transfer stations on the Russian Federation's front line were set on fire. According to them, they also physically disabled a vital section of the Moscow railway that actively served military trains. Tons of resources for frontline supplies and their distribution were constantly passing through here. Even the repair line for damaged equipment heading in the opposite direction has been cut off. This is a deadly attack from within on the operational capabilities of the Russian army in this direction, which has lost a strategically important railway line. Not only are the logistics lines being hit, but the army's nervous system is being struck from within. Amidst the chaos, Agent Atesh emerged, targeting a critical communications facility in the Belgorod region. Intelligence from the field confirms that an agent set fire to a hardware module at the base of a massive communications tower, completely disabling the facility. This is not simple arson. It is surgical sabotage that wiped out the backup communications networks that Russian command centers were expected to switch to during power outages. These outages effectively destroyed the Russian army's southern bridges. While Russian artillery at the front awaited ammunition, those shells were stranded hundreds of kilometers behind, in a dark and cold station. Digging deeper, this logistical strangulation nullifies the Russian army's operational capability. The Luch thermal power plant supplied not only the civilian grid, but also military bases, repair workshops, and communications centers in the region. When the power went out, the cranes in the workshops repairing damaged tanks stopped. The welding machines fell silent. The military servers providing data flow between the front and Moscow switched to backup generators. However, due to fuel supply disruptions, these systems also went down one by one. Soldiers at military bases in Belgorod face the threat of freezing, just like civilians. The will to fight of a garrison that cannot heat itself, wash itself, or communicate collapses even without being hit by missiles. The destruction on the civilian side is creating chaos that fuels this military disaster. With the pumps stopped, the water network has collapsed. 200,000 people are without water. When water and electricity are cut off at the same time in a city, that city is no longer a place to live, but an arena for survival. Fire stations cannot keep up with the calls, because burst pipes and frozen hydrants make intervention impossible. Hospitals are operating only on emergency generators. However, operating rooms and intensive care units are at risk. This chaotic environment is causing Russian security forces to shift their focus from the front lines to internal security. This is where Ukraine's strategy shines. They are forcing Russia to make a choice. Either they withdraw their air defense systems from the front lines to protect the power plants in Belgorod, which leaves the front line vulnerable, or they turn a blind eye to these cities freezing and logistics collapsing. It currently appears that the Kremlin has chosen the latter option, and the Russian people are paying the price. Industrial production has also been disrupted, with local businesses suffering an estimated direct loss of millions of dollars. This disruption has also disabled 60% of mobile networks, hampering emergency communications and further slowing the local economy. In the long term, repair costs could start in the hundreds of millions of dollars and reach billions. Critical infrastructure such as power plants requires high-tech turbines and generators. Damage repairs at similar Russian energy facilities take an average of 8 to 12 months and cost around $100 to $500 million per facility. Western sanctions come into play here. Russia's access to foreign parts is limited. For example, the import of Western-made equipment such as Siemens or General Electric is banned. This extends repair times to months and increases costs by 20 to 50%. However, the real price is being paid on the front lines. This disruption in the logistics chain will lead to a dramatic drop in Russian artillery fire in the coming days, tanks running out of fuel, and soldiers struggling with hunger and cold. The blackout in Belgorod means the collapse of the logistical backbone of the Russian occupation in Donbass, and an army whose backbone is broken, no matter how large, cannot march. Putin's tacit social contract with the Russian people, which had lasted for over 20 years, was based on a simple but rigid exchange. Give me political obedience and unquestioning loyalty, and I will give you stability, security, and the pride of great Russia. However, on the frozen streets of Belgorod and Bryansk, this contract was shattered before the eyes of millions. When the smoke stopped rising from the Luk power plant's chimneys, what actually dissipated into the air was Putin's promise that, "I can protect you." That night, stability vanished. Security gave way to pure panic and chaos. This event is triggering an unprecedented demographic earthquake within Russia, an internal refugee crisis. There is no heating, no water, no electricity, and deadly cold outside. For people, there is only one logical option left: to flee. However, this flight is not an orderly evacuation, but a wave of desperate migration. Residents of Belgorod and Bryansk are taking to the roads, unable even to pack their bags, just hugging their children. Train stations are locked, roads are icy and dangerous. Despite this, there are claims of migrations to Voronezh, Kursk, and even Moscow. Grey zones are forming within Russia's own territory. Belgorod and Bryansk are effectively becoming depopulated buffer zones. Putin went to war to create a buffer zone on Ukrainian territory. Ironically, however, due to his strategic incompetence and Ukraine's determined attacks, his own border cities have become uninhabitable buffer zones. This situation is not only a humanitarian burden for the Kremlin, but also a massive economic and political one. Hundreds of thousands of angry, frozen, and homeless citizens gathering at Moscow's gates is the regime's worst nightmare. Because every refugee arriving in Moscow brings the cold reality of war to the capital. The wall of illusion is crumbling. The lies of state television that everything is under control melt away in the face of the anger of a mother fleeing a frozen apartment. The psychological collapse of the people is a far more dangerous dynamic than military defeat. In the fourth year of the special military operation, Russians are fighting not for victory, but for survival. The cries of, "The situation is really bad, we need peace," heard in the videos, show that Russian society's war fatigue has now crossed a critical threshold. Authoritarian regimes stand on fear and respect. However, when the people see that the state cannot even fulfill its basic function of providing heat and shelter, fear gives way to anger born of helplessness. Putin's strong leader myth is freezing to death in the dark streets of Belgorod. Governor Gladkov's helpless statements are an admission that the central government has lost control in the provinces. Despite these events, Russia continues to be a country of ironies. While Solovyov debates whether Ukraine really needs to be cleansed of Nazis, he argues that all of Europe, up to Lisbon, should belong to Russia. But those dreaming of Lisbon cannot even provide hot water to their own citizens in Belgorod today. This is the clearest evidence of the regime's schizophrenic split. While their eyes are on the map of Europe, the ground beneath their feet is crumbling. On the international stage, this picture once again wipes out Russia's superpower image. It is a diplomatic humiliation that a country that prides itself on being an energy exporter and threatens to freeze Europe cannot even protect the power plants on its border. Ukraine is sending a clear message to the world with these attacks. Russia's heartland is defenseless, its energy infrastructure is fragile, and Putin's control hangs by a thread. When power outages hit industry, economic losses will multiply. Factories will shut down, production will fall, and inflation will flare up even more. Let's not forget that Russia is already experiencing serious livelihood difficulties. Russians who have received their first bills of the year and seen increases of up to 300% on average continue to express their anger on social media. The average Russian utility bill now equals an average mortgage, or 50% of the average salary. Prices are expected to double in the fall. The lights that went out that night did not just plunge Belgorod into darkness, they were a warning flare illuminating the Kremlin's future. Putin's biggest promise, stability and security, collapsed on that frosty night. The cold breath of war is now on the neck of not only the soldier at the front, but also the civilian at home. Ukraine has turned energy into a weapon against Russia, and the message is very clear. There is no safe place. War has come to your home. The wreckage of the Luch power plant and the frozen railways are proof of how fragile Russian logistics are. This winter will be not just a meteorological season for Russia, but an existential test. And in this test, it will not be the generals who are decisive, but the bursting water pipes and frozen rails. The gates of frozen hell have swung wide open for Russia. So, what are your thoughts on this matter? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on PPR Global's new analyses. Thank you for choosing us.